The morning the scarred gunman started building, he set a fresh planed board across 2 sawhorses outside the one house in Cedar Hollow that no family would enter, and began sanding it smooth in the gray light before sunrise, for a girl who had never once been able to see the sun. Maribel Ashe sat in the doorway, with her milky, unseeing eyes turned toward the sound of his hands. 8 years turned away from every door in that valley, and she did not know yet that the quiet stranger meant to give her the one thing the whole town had refused her: a place to belong. She heard the sandpaper before she heard the man. A long, patient hiss, back and forth, board going smooth under a palm that was in no hurry at all. Maribel had learned to live by sound the way other people lived by sight, and the sound told her a stranger was working not 3 feet from her threshold, working as if he had every right to be there, as if the cabin behind her were a home and not a leaning shack the county had let her squat in because no one else would take it. "Mister," she said, low, "you've got the wrong house." The sanding stopped. She heard him straighten, heard the small creak of a man's knees, heard the scuff of a boot turning toward her. When he spoke, his voice came out worn and even, a voice quiet as a door easing shut. "I've got the right one," he said. "Heard there was a porch wanted building here." There was no porch. There had never been a porch. There was a step of split logs gone soft with rot, and a sill where Maribel's bare hand found splinters every morning of her life. She had asked the county man for a board to mend it 3 winters running, and 3 winters running she had been told a blind girl alone had no business on a porch she could not keep swept. "Who sent you?" she asked. "Nobody sends me anywhere," the man said, and then, after a silence in which she heard only the wind move through the cottonwoods and the far complaint of a crow, he added, "Name's Tate. Tate Renner. I'll be a few days." He went back to his sanding, as though that settled it, and the long, patient hiss of the paper started up again. Smoothing a board for a porch nobody had asked him to build, down the road, where Cedar Hollow gathered its small mean self around a freight office and a church and a boarding house that had turned Maribel away on her 8th birthday, the watching had already begun. Harlan Pike stood in the door of his freight and gun shop with a plug of tobacco in his cheek and his thumbs hooked in his belt. And he watched the stranger work as a man watches a snake decide which way to go. Harlan Pike knew a killer when he saw one. He had counted the single-oiled revolver, noted how the man wore it low and easy, the scar that ran pale from the corner of the eye down into the dark stubble, the trail dust ground so deep into the leather it would never brush out. "That," Harlan said to no one and everyone, "is a man who has buried more folks than he's fed." By noon half the town had found a reason to walk past the Ashe place. They saw a tall, lean man, maybe 32, in a sweat-stained brown felt hat and a worn leather jacket gone the color of old saddles, building a porch for the blind girl as easy as breathing. And they could not for the life of them work out why. A gunman did not raise a porch for nothing. A gunman did not kneel in the dirt at a poor girl's door and check his angles with a string and a stone weight, gentle and unhurried, while she sat above him, with her sightless face tilted to catch the warmth he was making room for. There had to be a reason, and because they could not see it, they decided it must be a bad one. "He'll have something off her," said Odell Cruz, who ran the mill and who had worked Maribel 2 full years scrubbing his floors before he turned her out the week his wife complained a blind girl was bad luck under a roof. "Mark me. His kind don't give. They take, and they take slow." Maribel could not see any of them, but she could hear a town gather. She heard the boots slow on the road and the murmurs start and stop, heard the particular hush of people looking at her and deciding things about her without once saying good morning, and she had heard it so many times in 8 years that she knew exactly what it weighed. She had been 24 for a month. She had been turned away from every door in this valley since she was 16. The boarding house, the church cellar, the homes of two cousins who'd sooner forget her. The mill, the dry goods loft, the very orphan train that had left her here and rolled on. Nobody would take the blind girl in. The valley had decided that about her a long time ago and made it as fixed and certain as the mountains, and she had stopped, mostly hoping it might change. So when the stranger named Tate built her a porch board by board, she did not let herself believe in it. She had believed in kindness twice and been made a fool both times, and a third time would cost more than she had left to spend. But there was one thing she noticed that morning that she could not explain, and it was the thing that kept her sitting in that doorway long past the hour she'd usually have gone in. Somewhere in the work, Tate stopped. She heard the soft snap of a metal lid, heard a small ticking thing wound by a thumb, heard him hold it a moment to his ear, as a man holds a thing that matters more than money. Then the lid snapped shut, and the sanding began again. A man like that did not carry tenderness, but he carried something in a watch the size of a robin's egg, and he took it out only when he thought no one could hear, and Maribel, who lived entirely by what she could hear, filed it away. There was a reason this stranger built porches for blind girls who had nothing to give him. She did not know yet what it was, neither did the town. But the watch knew, and the watch ticked on against Tate Renner's chest while he worked, keeping account of something that had nothing to do with the time of day. It took him 4 days, and the town hated every hour of it. Those 4 days were the strangest Maribel Ashe had known. For 8 years her mornings had been a kind of careful arithmetic of survival, feel for the water bucket, count the steps to the spring so she didn't pitch into the gully, ration the cornmeal that Odell Cruz's wife left at the road's edge a few times a winter. Food left for a stray you didn't want but couldn't quite let starve. She had learned the whole shape of her poverty by touch. Now there was a second set of sounds in her world. A man's slow breathing as he worked, the bite of a saw, the small grunt when he lifted a beam, and under it all, threaded through every hour, the patient hiss of sandpaper going back and forth, making something smooth that no one but Maribel would ever run a hand along. She found herself, by the second day, listening for it the moment she woke, the way you listen for the breathing of someone you're afraid has slipped off in the night. On the second day, Harlan Pike came up the road, with the Reverend Coyle and Odell Cruz behind him, 3 respected men of Cedar Hollow, walking abreast with the certainty of men who have decided they are right. They stopped at the edge of the bare yard where Tate knelt fitting a joint, and Maribel, in the doorway, felt the air change, as it always changed, before a door shut on her. "Renner," Harlan said, trying the name out like a loaded thing. "We know who you are. We've sent a wire to Yuma." Tate did not look up from the joint. He set the tenon, tapped it home with the heel of his hand, tested it with a pull. "Wire whoever you like," he said. "We don't want your kind nesting here," Odell Cruz said. "Building's one thing, staying's another." "He's not staying," Reverend Coyle said gentler, with the gentleness of a man who is still saying no. "Are you, son? You'll do your charity, and you'll ride. We're a Christian town. We look after our own." Maribel heard that, and something in her went very still and very cold, because she had been their own for 16 years before she lost her sight, and she had not been looked after one single day after. She had learned not to speak when the men talked over her, but she spoke now, into the silence where Tate had not answered. "You looked after me," she said, "by leaving me a step that's rotted through." Nobody answered her. They never did. The 3 men looked at the blind girl in the doorway, looked at the gunman in the dirt, and could not square the two of them, and what a man cannot square he resents. Harlan Pike spat into the dust. 4 days, he said. Then we'll know what you're really after. and they walked back down the road abreast, 3 righteous men who had come to warn a killer and gone home having threatened a blind girl instead, and not one of them felt the wrongness of it, because they had agreed long ago what Maribel Ashe was worth. Tate fitted the next board. The sanding started again, patient as rain. "You can go," Maribel told him that evening, when the work light failed and she heard him cleaning his plane by feel. "You've heard what they are. I don't want it on me, what they do to you." "They won't do anything," Tate said. "You don't know this town." "I know every town," he said, and there was no boast in it, only a tiredness so deep she felt it in her own chest. "They're all this town." She turned that over a long while. The cottonwoods hushed. Somewhere down the road a dog barked twice and gave it up. "Why a porch?" she finally said. "Of everything a man could give a person who has nothing. Why a porch?" The plane stopped. She heard him stand, heard the small ticking thing come out of his coat again, heard him hold it. When he spoke, his voice had gone somewhere far back. "Because I knew a girl couldn't see," he said, "who wanted the morning more than anything, and I was too busy being dangerous to give it to her in time." The lid snapped shut. "That's all. Go to sleep, Miss Ashe. It'll be done before it's cold." She did not sleep. She sat in the doorway with her unseeing eyes toward the dark, where a stranger had told her the truest thing anyone had told her in 8 years, and for the first time in a long time, Maribel Ashe let herself want something, and was afraid of how much it hurt to want it. She had heard the truth in his voice, but she had not heard all of it, because Tate Renner had told no living soul all of it in 11 years. The girl who couldn't see, the one who wanted the morning, had a name. Caroline. She had been his little sister, 3 years younger, blind from a fever at 7, and she had loved one thing in the whole gray hard world more than any other, to sit in the first light and feel the sun come up across her face before the day got loud. In the dugout where they grew up there had been no place for it. The door faced north, into the wind. And Tate, 14 and full of plans, had promised her a porch, a real one, facing east, where the sunrise would be hers to own as plainly as other folks owned land. He had promised it 2 years running. He was measuring boards in his head the morning the men came for the debt their dead father left, and in the trouble that came after, Tate Renner became something else, fast, hard, sought after, a name spoken low in 3 territories. And Caroline waited on a porch that her brother, off proving how dangerous he was, never came home to build. She died of the same fever come back, on a cot facing north, 26 years old, with the morning on the wrong side of the wall. The watch on Tate's chest had been hers. He wound it every dawn she would have woken to. And he had been riding 11 years trying to set down a guilt the size of the sky, building porches for blind strangers who sat in the wrong light, asking no pay, staying a few days, moving on. He had built 7. Maribel Ashe was the 8th, and he had ridden in meaning her to be the same as the others. A porch, a sunrise, a quiet goodbye, before he had to watch a door stay shut on her, the way it had stayed shut on Caroline. And here, before the morning that changes everything, I want to say the one thing plainly, because it is the whole reason this little channel exists, and the whole reason you and I are sitting together in the gray of somebody else's dawn. The stories I tell here are all this one story, told different ways. The overlooked one, the turned away one. The person a whole town agreed wasn't worth the trouble, who turns out to be worth more than every soul that dismissed her. That is the only kind of story you will ever find on this channel. So if some part of you still believes the dismissed person is the one worth choosing, the blind girl on the rotted step, the scarred man everyone crossed the road to avoid, then stay with me and take a moment to subscribe, because that belief is the entire heart of this place, and what Tate Renner is about to do in front of the whole town is the part I have been waiting all story to tell you. The porch grew. He built it facing east, which puzzled the town worse than anything, because the front of the ash shack faced north onto the road, and a sensible man would have built where folks could see. Tate built around the side, around to where the floor of the valley fell away toward the river, and the whole eastern sky opened up clean over the mountains. He built a porch where there was nothing to look at, for a girl who could not look. He set the posts plumb and the rails smooth, and he sanded every board twice, kneeling, running his rough thumb along each one to find the splinter before her bare foot could, and the town watched a known killer crawl on his knees, making a blind girl's floor safe to walk, and decided, because they could not understand it, that he was surely casing the valley for an outfit of his kind that would come in the night. On the third afternoon, the heat went heavy, and Tate's water gourd ran dry. Maribel heard him stop, heard the dry shake of the empty gourd, and before he could ask, she was already up, crossing her own yard with the unhurried certainty of a woman who had walked that ground 10,000 times in the dark behind her eyes. She went to the spring without a stick, found the cool jug she kept sunk in the bank to keep it cold, and brought it back and held it out into the air toward exactly where his breathing was. "You knew where I stood," Tate said, taking it. There was something new in his voice. Not pity. "Surprise, you breathe loud when you work," Maribel said. "And your left boot drags. You favor that hip. You were shot there, once, or kicked." She heard him go still. "I'm not feeble, Mr. Renner. I just can't see." "There's a difference the whole town never learned." He drank, and was quiet a while, and then he said, "What else do you know about me, just by listening?" So she told him. She told him he was right-handed but ate left-handed, which meant he kept his right hand free out of long habit. She told him he checked the road 4 times an hour without breaking the rhythm of his work, as a hunted man does. She told him his voice dropped and softened only when he spoke to her, or to the yellow dog, and went flat and far away when the townsmen came near. She told him he wound that watch at the same moment every morning, just before the light, like a man keeping an appointment with someone who never came. And when she said that last one, the sanding stopped for a long moment, and she heard him breathe out slow, and she knew she had walked too close to the buried thing, and she said, gently, "I'm sorry. I see with my ears, and sometimes I see too much." "No," Tate said. "Most folks look right at me and see a gun. You can't look at me at all, and you're the first one in 11 years who's seen the man." He went back to work. But his voice, when he spoke again, had the softness in it she'd noticed he saved, and he kept it there the rest of the afternoon, and Maribel sat above him on the half-built porch and understood that something was happening to her that she had sworn would never happen again. She was beginning to be known. And being known, after 8 years of being looked past, was a more dangerous and beautiful thing than any porch. There were people, though, who watched and saw something else. The boy saw it first. Toby was 9, grandson to Sister Beck, who kept the boarding house, a thin, watchful boy who'd been told to stay away from the gunman, and who therefore spent every spare hour at the edge of the ash yard with a one-eared yellow dog that had adopted him. The dog was the second to see. On the third morning, the yellow dog, who feared boots and men and loud sounds, walked across the bare yard on its own and lay down in the wood shavings against Tate Renner's knee while he worked, and settled its chin on its paws, and slept there in the sun. A dog that trusted no one had walked past every man in Cedar Hollow to sleep against the most dangerous one, and Toby, who knew that dog, stood at the edge of the yard with his mouth open, and began, slowly, to understand that the grown men had it wrong. "He's not bad," Toby told his grandmother that night. "You stay away from him," Sister Beck said. "He found the splinters with his own hands so she wouldn't," the boy said. "Bad men don't do that." Sister Beck had no answer to that, which is the most dangerous thing that can happen to a settled opinion. On the fourth day, Tate finished the porch. He finished it at dusk, fitted the last rail and sanded it, and swept the shavings off the new floor with a broom he'd made from a stick and a bundle of grass. And then he did a strange thing. He went into the cabin and came out with the one good chair and set it in the exact center of the porch facing east, and he took Maribel's hand. She had not been touched with any gentleness in so long that her whole arm flinched, and he walked her out onto her own porch, slow, telling her quietly where the post was and where the rail came and where the chair waited, and he sat her down in it, facing a sunrise she would never see, and he said, "Tomorrow morning, sit here." That was all. Then he went and slept in the barn, and Maribel sat on her new porch in the dark and ran her hands along a rail that someone had made smooth on purpose so that she would not be hurt, and she put her face down against the clean wood and wept as you weep when a thing you stopped hoping for arrives anyway. She did not know that this was the night it would all nearly go wrong. Harlan Pike's wire had come back from Yuma. It came back worse than Harlan hoped, and better than he could have dreamed, for his purposes. The reply named Tate Renner a wanted man, not for killing, but the wire didn't say that part, and Harlan didn't ask. It said wanted. It said reward. It said $200 to the man who brought him in. Harlan Pike read that figure standing in his freight office and felt the whole shape of the thing change in his hands. He had wanted the gunman gone. Now the gunman was worth $200 and a story he could tell for the rest of his life, and there is no animal more certain of itself than a small man who has just been handed a reason to do what he already wanted to do. He gathered 5 men in the back of the gun shop that night. Odell Cruz, the Pruitt brothers, who would do anything for money and a little for fun. A drifter named Sykes, who happened to be passing and liked the sound of $200. By the smell of the lamp oil and whiskey they made themselves brave, and a little after midnight they walked up the road to the ash place with rope and a lantern, and the loose-jointed swagger of men who have decided that 6 against 1 is courage. Maribel heard them coming a quarter-mile off. She had always heard everything. She heard 6 sets of boots not trying to be quiet, heard the slosh of a man who drunk too much, heard the particular evil patience of men closing on something in the dark, and she was up off her new porch and across the yard to the barn before they cleared the cottonwoods, her bare feet finding the path her own, and Tate's feet had worn in 4 days. And she put her hand flat on the barn door and said into the dark, low and fast, "Tate, 6 men. Rope and a lamp. They mean you harm." He was already awake. She heard the small sounds of a man who slept in the shallow listening sleep of hunted men, heard the gun belt lifted, and, a breath later, set back down. "Get behind the wall," he said. "Whatever happens out there, you stay behind the wall. You'll need." "I won't use it," Tate said, and she understood, somehow, that he meant the gun, that he had decided something about this town and this girl and the watch in his coat that he was not going to unmake by killing 6 fools in the dark. Behind the wall, Maribel. It was the first time he'd said her name. She went behind the wall. What the 6 men found when they came swaggering into the yard with their lantern was a man standing easy and empty-handed in front of a blind girl's brand-new porch, his revolver hung on a nail by the door 10 feet from his hand, where they could all see he wasn't reaching for it. They had braced themselves for a gunfight they understood. They did not understand a wanted killer standing still with his hands loose at his sides, and it stopped them at the edge of the lantern light like a wall. $200, Renner, Harlan Pike said, too loud. "Yuma wants you. Don't make it hard. Then take me," Tate said. "I won't fight you. But you'll do it off her land. She's got a porch 4 days old. You're not bleeding on it. It was such a strange thing to say that for a moment nobody moved. 6 armed men, and a reward, and the famous gunman just standing there asking only that they not stain a blind girl's floorboards. The Pruitt brothers looked at each other. Sykes the drifter, who had killed men and knew the look of a man who decided to die clean, lowered his rope. And into that hanging silence, the boy spoke. Toby had followed them. Of course he had. He stood now at the edge of the lantern light in his nightshirt, with the one-eared yellow dog pressed against his leg, and he said, in the high, clear, carrying voice of a child who has not yet learned that the truth is dangerous, he builds porches. For blind folks. He built her one, so she could feel the morning. My dog loves him, and my dog don't love nobody. The boy's voice cracked. You're going to hang a man for building a porch. Lanterns make a small light, but a child's voice in the dark can light up a thing no lantern reaches. The Pruitt brothers shuffled. Odell Cruz looked at the new porch he could just see at the edge of the light, the smooth rail, the chair set facing east at nothing. And something moved behind his face that had not moved in years. And Harlan Pike, feeling his courage and his story and his $200 draining out of the night, did the thing that small men do when they are losing. He reached for his gun. He never cleared leather. Sykes the drifter of all people put a hand on Harlan's wrist, hard, and held it. No, Sykes said, not for $200. Not over this. And he looked at Tate Renner a long moment, one hard man to another, and then he picked up his rope and walked out of the lantern light and out of Cedar Hollow and was never seen there again. The thing fell apart as a mob always does, one man at a time, finding he no longer wants to be the last one holding the rope. The Pruitt brothers went. Odell Cruz stood the longest, looking at the porch, and when he left he did not swagger. Only Harlan Pike stayed, holding his shamed wrist, and at last he too turned and walked down the road, and his story died in his mouth, and Cedar Hollow learned by morning that 6 grown men had gone to hang a gunman in the night and been turned back by a child and a porch and the killer's own refusal to fight. But that, you understand, was only the night it nearly went wrong. The town had stopped a hanging. It had not yet changed its mind about Maribel Ash. Stopping a wrong is not the same as doing a right, and Cedar Hollow had 8 years of wrong to answer for. Tate Renner meant to ride out the next morning, as he always rode out. Porch finished. Debt to a dead girl paid down by one more sunrise given away. He had Caroline's watch in his coat and the trail in his blood, and he saddled at first light meaning to be over the ridge before the town was up. Maribel found him in the barn, with the cinch in his hands. "You're going," she said. Not a question. She had heard the saddle. "It's done," Tate said. "The porch is good. The rail's smooth. You'll be all right now." "I won't," she said simply, "same as I wasn't before. A porch doesn't make a town take you in, Tate. You of all people know that. You build the morning, and you ride off, and the door's still shut. I'll sit on your beautiful porch, and starve just the same." The cinch stopped moving in his hands. Because she was right, and because no one had ever said it to him in 11 years and 7 porches, that he had been giving blind strangers a sunrise, and calling it enough, riding off before he had to watch a single one of those doors stay shut behind him, gone over the ridge before the verdict came in. He had been paying his debt in the one coin that didn't cost him the thing he was actually afraid of, which was to stay. To stay and be known. To stay and risk a whole town deciding what he was worth, certain and unanimous as they always were. He took the watch out of his coat. Maribel heard the lid. "This was my sister's," he said, and it was the first time he had ever told a living soul. "She was blind. Like you. She wanted the morning. I promised her a porch, and I rode off to be somebody, and she died waiting for it. His voice did not break, but it thinned to almost nothing. I've built 7 since. You're the 8th. And you're the first one's had the nerve to tell me a porch isn't a home. Then build me a home, Maribel said, instead of a place to be alone in better. He did not ride out that morning. What he did instead, the town would tell for 40 years. Tate Renner walked into Cedar Hollow at full light, down the middle of the road in his trail coat with his hat in his hand and his revolver, every soul saw it, left hanging on a nail back at the ash place. He walked to the center of town where the freight office and the church and Sister Beck's boarding house made their little square, and he stood there, unarmed in front of the whole staring town, and he did not raise his voice. "My name is Tate Renner," he said. "Some of you wired Yuma. The reward's real. I won't run from it, and I won't fight a one of you over it. You can send for the marshal today." He turned slow, so they could all hear him. "But before you do, you're going to hear what your town did. There's a girl up that road you turned out when she was 16 for the crime of not being able to see. You've passed her rotted door for 8 years. Your church has a cellar, and you wouldn't give her the cellar. I'm a man with blood on him, and I gave her a porch in 4 days. And it shamed every one of you so bad you came to hang me for it, in the dark." He let that sit. "I'm not asking you to take me in. I know what I am. I'm asking what kind of town hangs a stranger for a kindness it was too small to do itself. It was Sister Beck who broke first, which surprised everyone but the boy. The old boarding house keeper, who had turned Maribel away on her 8th birthday, came out from behind her own counter, where she had stood deciding things about people for 30 years, and she walked out into the road, and she said, in front of the whole town, I had a room. All these years I had a room, and I told myself she'd be trouble. She was crying, which no one had ever seen. She was a child. I had a room. And the thing that had held Cedar Hollow rigid for 8 years, the comfortable, agreed upon, never spoken certainty that the blind girl was not their concern, cracked straight across, because once one person says the true thing out loud, the lie cannot be held by the others alone. Odell Cruz came forward, who had worked her 2 years and turned her out. He couldn't look at anyone. "I'll mend the road to her place," he said, to his boots. "It's washed out. I should have mended it years back." Reverend Coyle, who had called it a Christian town, stood gray-faced and said nothing at all, which from him was the loudest thing of the morning. And one by one, the town came together, the same machinery that breaks a mob run the other direction, one person at a time, finding they no longer want to be the one still holding the old hard thing. They did not send for the marshal. Harlan Pike's wire, it turned out, when Reverend Coyle finally rode to Yuma himself to be honest about it, named a different Renner entirely. A cousin, dead 2 years, and the real Tate Renner had never been wanted for anything but the leaving of porches unfinished, which is a crime no law in the territory had a name for. But the town did not know that yet, the morning Tate stood unarmed in the road. They chose Maribel before they knew Tate was innocent. That is the part that mattered. They were shamed into decency by a gunman and a child and a dog, and then they had to decide whether to stay decent once the shame wore off, and Cedar Hollow, to its lasting credit, decided to stay. They built up the ash place that summer. Caleb Furlong, who'd lost his wife to the same fever that took Tate's sister and knew about waking up to a quiet house, brought his tools the morning after and asked Maribel only, "You eaten?" and came back every morning after whether she answered or not. The widow Winnie Sharp brought a feather tick and a question about whether Maribel liked her coffee strong, as though the answer mattered, as though Maribel were a person whose preferences a body ought to know. Old Esther Doan, near blind herself with the years, came and sat on the new porch and taught Maribel the names of the morning birds by their songs, so that the sunrise Maribel could not see came to have 100 voices she could. That low one, Esther would say, tapping Maribel's wrist, that's the meadowlark, and he only sings when the light's full up. You'll never need a clock again, child, the birds keep better time than any watch. And Maribel would smile, and turn her face to the warmth, and say nothing about the watch she knew was hanging by the door, ticking out a count that had finally, after all these years, found a morning worth keeping. They put a true floor under the cabin, and a true door on it, and a stove that held its heat, and they did it not as charity flung at a problem, but as neighbors making right with one of their own, which is a different thing entirely, and the only thing that ever heals a town. And Tate stayed. He stayed through that first summer, and the harvest, and the first hard snow, sleeping in the barn at the start, and then, when the thing between him and Maribel had grown slow and rooted and sure, in the house, her husband by the next spring. He took the marshal's badge nobody else in Cedar Hollow wanted, the famous fast gun who would not draw it, and kept a peace so quiet that for years there was nothing to keep. He never built another porch for a stranger. He had built the last one he needed to build, and he had learned the thing Caroline's death had been trying to teach him across all those miles, that the porch was never the gift. The staying was the gift. The morning was only worth giving if you were still there at the next one. Maribel sat on her east-facing porch every dawn for the rest of her long life. She never saw a single sunrise, but she felt the first warmth come up over the mountains and touch her face, and she heard old Esther's 100 birds. And she heard the boy Toby grow into a man, and the one-eared dog grow old, and the town she could not see go on around her loving her, and she learned it in the body, and not the head, the slow certain learning that comes without words, that a sunrise is not the light. A sunrise is the warmth arriving. And warmth, it turns out, you can feel just fine with your eyes shut. If someone has bothered to build you a place to sit, and meant to stay and feel it with you, if you've been listening to this in the early gray of your own morning, somewhere out there past wherever Cedar Hollow would be, I'd be glad to know what town you're hearing it in. Drop the name of your place in the comments, because there's a little community of folks who gather here at dawn from every corner of the map, and I read every one of them. Tate Renner kept Caroline's watch on a nail by the front door, where his gun used to hang, and every morning of his life he wound it and held it to his ear a moment before he stepped out onto the porch to sit with his wife. He had ridden 11 years to put down a guilt the size of the sky, and he never did put it all the way down. That kind of grief you carry, you don't bury it. But he had learned to carry it on a porch instead of a horse, in the warmth instead of the wind, beside a woman who could not see him and saw him better than the whole bright world ever had. Some men give a thing away so they won't have to stay and watch it bloom. The rare one stays for the bloom, and finds the morning was never the gift he was running to give, but the home he was running from.